Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And today I'm going to be joined by Nick Bartlett. He is the director over at CBIP Logistics, and he's going to be joining us all the way over from Hong Kong. He's actually in the future right now. I'm just starting Monday. He's ending Monday. So we're going to talk a little bit about CBIP Logistics. We're going to talk a little bit about the D2C market in Asia, and a little bit about what's going on with de minimis, and also how CBIP has been focused on going carbon neutral in the last year and the process into doing that. And then we're going to talk a little bit too about their in-house tech platform, which is just kind of rolling out in beta, and what that means and why they're going in-house as well with it. So, Nick, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good, thanks, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on. Excited to be here, and I can confirm that the world did not end on this Monday. I'm still here. So even though I'm ahead of schedule, I can confirm that nothing serious has happened yet.
All right, great. Well, you heard it here first. The world has not ended, so it's great that Nick is joining us here, and definitely excited to talk to you about this and learn a little bit about what's going on over there on that side of the world as well. But for people maybe that are not familiar, why don't you give us kind of a brief overview of CBIP Logistics and what it is that you all do?
Yeah, sure. So CBIP Logistics, we're a fourth-party logistics provider connecting brands with some of the world's leading and logistics solutions around the world, really. So the idea with our whole business model is that we sort of bridge the gap between what brands need and what necessarily traditional 3PLs may or may not be able to provide. So the best example of that, perhaps, is a brand that is, seeking expansion out of the US, is looking for to leverage a partner in, say, the Asia Pacific region or UK and Europe or somewhere like that, and is seeking sort of advice, local expertise, and doesn't necessarily want to lock themselves in with one specific 3PL contractor, and can kind of work with someone like us to sort of provide them with a suite of options that's really purpose built and really design led for the brand. Our whole sort of internal mantra is like that we represent the brand's promises. We don't represent a 3PL's profitability line, really, or the transactional commodity services that a 3PL sort of would normally offer. So very brand led. And as a fourth party logistics provider, we are still kind of and I kind of call us an unconventional logistics company. Yes, we are intrinsically involved from start to finish, and we take full contract and operational responsibility for every aspect of the delivery that we offer customers. So we don't just match make and say these are the subbies that we think we should use. It's very much a sort of design, build, and execute business model. And we've been running the business now out of Hong Kong originally since 2015, and started working with smaller brands. And now we sort of average brands doing sort of between $5 and $100 million and supporting over 100 brands globally, shipping across 160 odd countries or whatever it is. And we've got 15 domestic geographical locations, so 15 different independent locations that we're operating and servicing customers to take advantage of this 4PL network that we've built and that we're working with. So really exciting to be speaking with more and more providers and customers in the US side, particularly as people seek expansion beyond their current domestic market. And I think that's an exciting time for brands as a lot of them mature now in the US market and are seeking kind of where is that next growth coming from. And that's really where our business comes in. And we're excited to be able to have those conversations with brands, particularly out here in Asia, where there's a lot of exciting growth coming, and it's a great place to be if your product's the right fit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very interesting how you focused on that and are helping to create those kind of international expansions, as you mentioned there. So, I mean, talk to us a little bit about kind of what is the state of the D2C market in Asia right now. I mean, what does it look like? I mean, there's a lot of conversation about I guess companies that are shipping into the United States using de minimis and things like that. But I mean, even just internally within Asia, I mean, how does the D2C market look over there?
Yeah, so look, I think the great thing about the one thing I'd say that a lot of people don't understand about Asia is it is quite far behind
Mm,
the Western markets in lots of ways. A really good example
mm,
is infrastructure. There's not necessarily as much good infrastructure as a lot of the mature markets. Now, naturally, that is evolving quite quickly, and if you think about sort of logistics, it's actually really similar. So progression around technology adoption, progression around sustainability initiatives, progression around the way that the asset and the infrastructure inside the logistics industry has progressed is just not as fast as what you see in the US, in particular, as a direct comparison.
Mm.
So as a result of that, kind of e-commerce sort of also followed that similar route, where it hasn't quite picked up. Now, this is excluding the likes of the mainland Chinese, who have obviously been a massive e-commerce pioneer in
Hmm.
the space and have really demanded both strong infrastructure and a very good international cross-border um, orientation, because they are strongly encouraged and motivated by their own economy, which is manufacturing. So slightly different
Mm.
context for China. You'd almost remove them out of this particular question. But if you look at kind of how is the East faring at the moment, certainly it is only picking up and gaining great growth, and it's becoming particularly notable in the markets where there wasn't as much technology adoption. So the online buying in places like
Mm.
Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand. These places have taken a lot longer for adoption. Whereas American consumers have grown up with mobile phones, and it's just part of your life, right? You don't think too much about it.
It's just natural.
It's
Yeah.
natural, and the price points kind of work, and the product suites kind of what people are looking for. But you go to Vietnam, it's different, right? You can buy most things that you need in a local store or down on the side street. Or
Mm.
convenience has never really been like the center of the decision making, but now we're seeing this really good level of adoption coming through. And so what that's meant is that as e-commerce has ramped and has become more popular, it's meant that the conversions become higher, the infrastructure's got better, the technology's got better. I can tell you that I've
Mm.
been living in Asia for 10 years. And when I first moved to Hong Kong to now, and this is Hong Kong also sort of falls under the Chinese category in terms of kind of progression and commitment to ecom. But, we have an
Mhm.
equivalent of an Amazon here called HKTV Mall. It's just like Amazon, like it's a next day or same day delivery, and literally anything you want, you can get it. And the whole thing that wasn't even here 10 years ago. So just to sort of show you that as an adoption, food delivery wasn't
Mm.
here 10 years ago. So all of these things sort of point towards this convenience becoming king. But that's also all supported by strong development infrastructure, good technology advancements, and obviously catching up with the rest of the world, because no one wants to be left behind, right? And the East is certainly
Yeah.
demonstrating real appetite. And I think the really big winners, are the big marketplaces, the cross-border marketplaces, the likes of Shopee, Lazada, more domestic marketplaces like Tiki in Vietnam. These types of guys are really starting now to show their true colors. They had a lot of money thrown into them very early. They had lots of struggles around profitability and getting to a point of whether or not they could sustain their business models. But now it's sort of, because the volume is now sweeping in behind it, as adoption increases,
Mm.
technology increases, infrastructure increases. Now it's like, actually, now we've got a really good business here, and and those guys that invested earlier are now getting the dividends of it. And so, all in all, I would say it's a fruitful time. We're certainly getting good year-on-year growth, and importantly enough, I think what we're mostly seeing as well is a lot of brands actually wanting to come into the East. A lot of consumers
Mm.
seeking product from outside the region where they may not have been able to get it historically. So, American brands coming into Singapore or Hong Kong or the mainland, or even into Southeast Asia or down to Australia. So great to see sort of that consumer demand is now being pulled the other way. So it's not just about now a place where people go to get stuff made and then it all goes to America. Now it's like
Yeah.
it's now really circumventing, and we're seeing some great brands come out from the East as well, and brands that some of which we support and some of which we cheer from the sidelines, but some great stories coming out of some awesome
Mm.
brands from the East.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to hear how that kind of advancement is growing more rapidly now, and how it's developing within that. And I think it makes sense. Like you mentioned, there's such a manufacturing base there, and a lot of the e-commerce brands that are big in, whether it's the UK, Europe, or the United States. I mean, a lot of that manufacturing is happening there, right? So
Yeah,
why not also try and serve that same market, where I'm sure if you're manufacturing within the same country and then selling within the same country, I mean, it's gonna the cost is gonna be a little lower than trying to get it overseas
yeah.
as well. So tell us a little bit about maybe kind of like for Western brands, right? I mean, how do they kind of look at expanding into the Asian market, and when does it really make sense to do that?
Yeah, so look, this is such a big question because there's so many facets to this
Mm,
particular question, and I think honestly, like it sounds cliche, but it feels like every story is different, you know. But the first, I think I sort of break it down into sort of like three or four sections whenever we're talking to brands, right? Because for us, obviously, like a key aggregate or a key marker for us of whether or not a customer would be a good fit for us is, do they have ambitions to go beyond their current four walls? And if they do, then kind of
mm,
what is that ambition driven by? Is it just driven by people that some brands honestly just say, oh, because it'd be cool to be there, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, that's cool, but really, like, it takes a lot to set up a new
yeah.
market, right? It's like going to live in a new country. You don't just show
Mm,
up and it works. You've got to work hard. You've got to do your homework about where to live. You've got to make friends. You've got to speak the language. You've got to adapt your style and adjust to culture norms. So the one thing I always say to people is like, what is the data telling us? What is a lot of brands have organic growth within their customer base. And that organic growth is often the best place to start with. What is the data telling us in terms of, hey, we get a few orders for
mm,
China, we get a few orders for Singapore, we get a few orders for Japan, Korea, and a lot of the time they kind of go dismissed, like, oh, 99% of our orders are the US, but we get 1% goes to Japan. And then it's like, well, that's odd.
mm,
Why is it Japan, or why is it Hong Kong, or why is it Singapore? So I always sort of say to people, first and foremost, be led by what you do see organically. And if you do see that there's some appetite, then great, right? Be led by that as your first instinct on where to look. Now, if people that just have like a blanket strategy, I think for a brand less than kind of you know less than 20 million a year in revenue probably should think twice. I think just going with blanket is a bit ambitious. I think you really need to sort of start somewhere.
mm,
And if you look at some of the best brands, their strategy for expansion is they make the product relatively scarce, even in places where they kind of have still got a bit of demand, like small amount of demand, like, oh, hey, we now ship to, but we don't ship to everywhere, but we ship to this part, which is closer to where you
yeah.
might be. And I think that type of adoption is good because, one, it limits the resources required to invest in a new market, but it also means it kind of keeps your other customers knocking on the door, like, hey, you're selling in Singapore now,
Mm,
like, why are you not selling in Hong Kong? That's always a common one. So first one would be like, really understand that organic, what's the organic data telling us. Second one is, once you do kind of decide on what that market might be, you really need to go there. You need to go and see it for
mm,
yourself. And I know that again might seem a bit silly, but you don't move somewhere without going to see it first, do you? So why would you expect your
yeah.
consumers to be any different, really? And a lot of the time we're speaking with brands that they just don't have any context for the market, right? You speak to someone about, delivery, last mile delivery in Australia is surprisingly complicated. It's very like the US. There's lots of similarities. It's
Mm,
big, it's highly matrixed. None of the carriers cover the whole country. They all use each other. And the prices are pretty absurd in some areas. They're more competitive in others. So the whole dynamic of just the last mile delivery, like, go and see it for yourself. Go and experience getting a delivery locally. Go and see what your sort of customers would feel. So we always encourage people to come and see us or any vendor that they're talking to, but really get that context for the market, understand what consumers are looking for, what they're like, and also, most importantly, like, what is the local experience that you want to build for the brand? Because there's a
mm,
real lack of localization when I look at international brand expansion. There is just very little given to, hey, we're speaking to an Australian customer now, and we need to
mm,
adjust our style and show them that we're an American brand, but we get them, and we're relating to them, and we know them, and we can deliver our product in a way that will resonate well with them. So that's sort of number two, is
mm.
kind of that, really do your research. And again, it might seem really simple, but my advice for the research is not like go on Google and see what it says. My advice is like,
Yeah.
get in there and get into the weeds and like experience it. Go and see it. Do it. If you're really committed to the market, you got to do it. The third
Mm,
thing is like, don't be resource shy. You just cannot do an expansion if you're willing to be resource shy. And what I mean by that is like not putting enough people on it, not really being committed to it. Again, we see
mm,
lots of brands with big ambitions. Their product could really do well, but they just don't put the resources into it. And then they put a lot of emphasis on their partners, and often the partners are just kind of flying blind,
mhm.
different time zones. No one's available for calls, and all of a sudden it falls over. And I think if you don't, it's just like anything, right? If you're going to do it properly. Don't do it half-hearted,
Yeah.
and that's a big one for expansion. And then the last one's probably just, sort of a bit of a tip to finding the right people to work with, I guess, because,
Mm,
local partners, local knowledge, all of that stuff's critical. And one of the things that, like, I love that we do, and I know other 3PLs and stuff do this as well, but like we always encourage the brands to come out and just hosting them, right? Showing them around, taking them for drives around the city and showing them different brands, and really just sort of trying to, like, just get into the minds of their world, right? And that I find that really works really, really well. Everyone kind of leaves those meetings with fresh perspectives and a bit of appreciation for kind of what's required to be successful in that market, as well as a
mm,
chance to get a feel for, like, the lay of the land with different vendors as well, right? Because obviously, the market's full of vendors and it's really hard to decide sometimes. Like, who do I go with? That guy sounds nice on the phone, but I
yeah.
don't know what he's going to be like in 3 months. And so I think finding the right partners is key. But how do you do that? Again, you've sort of got to just be all in, committed, and get out to these places and see people and invest.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's interesting to, you touched on there kind of, how do you, now, like maybe there's some interest there in that market, but how do you make sure that you're really kind of catering to that market? Because it's going to be a little different. The customer and the culture as well, and then things like that are going to be different, and how those things are gonna operate. So I mean, in that sense, I'm curious, like, what is the, because here, in the United States where I'm at, obviously, like Amazon has certainly set a precedent for delivery time and things like that. I mean, as e-commerce is continuing to evolve over on that side of the world. I mean, are those expectations still there? I mean, I guess what's important to the consumer there from like an e-commerce perspective?
Yeah, I think it's surprisingly not orientated around speed of delivery. Um,
Mm,
yes, of course, everyone wants to get it quickly. I think the thing that really probably drives a huge amount of the success of brands is around trust. And
mm,
trust in an Asian culture is of the highest sort of
yeah.
quality. It's one of the highest values that is positioned, right? So I think also, for going back to that original question, like, why has Asia been a bit slower maybe with their adoption? I think part of it
Mm,
is that it's like, who am I giving my credit card to? Who are these people? Are they going to scam me? Like,
mm,
what's going on here? Whereas the US it's a tightly regulated market. The banking sector has got lots of eyeballs on it. It's not like you can get away in the US with scamming people as such. I know it happens, but certainly not the same way it happens
yeah.
in the East. But so I think that's a really big one. Is kind of, how do you build that trust, and that's kind of why that localization, showing that you understand, showing there's some trust factors there. That's really important, right? I see lots of brands trying to get into the mainland of China, and look, honestly, it's tough. Like, and I'm not a brand owner, like,
Mm,
so I've only got I've
yeah.
only got admiration for these guys that try and do it. And I know there's loads of trading partners. They're called TPs. They help you get into all these different sales channels like Tmall, and they can list your product
Hmm.
on all these different places and promise you a billion eyeballs, and it's massively complicated. But the really tricky thing is that it's a completely different game, different marketing channels, different
Mm,
communication style, complete localization of the product. You've pretty much got to speak to a product like you're a robot about. You've got to speak about your product like you're a robot. Because that's what they respond to, right? They
mm,
don't respond as much to all of the emotional factors that we in the Western world relate to when we're selling a product. So there's so
interesting.
many nuances that are just like hidden that you can't even see, that you really need to kind of adjust to. And I think if you're a brand, they're the things that you've got to do in order to kind of build customer confidence, localization, building trust, building credibility, showing you're the real deal. Because whilst a lot of people want an American brand in their home, like, or any
Hmm.
Western brand, doesn't have to be American, but they kind of want it in their home, because they want to show they've got a Louis Vuitton bag, a European bag, or a Nike, whatever it might
Mm,
be, right? So all of if you look at the guys that have done well, a lot of them have done exactly those three things. They've localized well, they've built trust well, and they've executed very much in that local context, frame of mind, that local context culture, versus just kind of going, I've got a cool product, I'm going to sell it. Very, very, very few brands can just say, I've got a great product, it's just going to sell itself. and they don't have to do anything, right? Very, very, very few. There might be a few exceptions.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to hear kind of the differences from like the cultural aspect of how the market reacts to products and what they're expecting and what's like important to them. I think that's pretty interesting. And so you mentioned earlier too that you kind of had to focus on the sustainability aspect too, and then that has been kind of slow within that market as well. But you guys are carbon neutral as of last year, right? So tell us a little bit about that, kind of what went into the process of making that happen. And then also, like, I mean, just why is that important in general for you to accomplish?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with why it's important.
Yeah.
You might hear it in my voice, but I'm from a small country in the South Pacific called New Zealand, and I grew up
Mm,
with our other director, the other founder of the business. We just had like the most idyllic childhoods, really. Blue water and
mm,
blue skies and mountains, and beautiful hiking and fresh water. And I never ever had any consideration for the planet other than that it was perfect. As a kid,
mm,
because coming from a place like that, you're just spoiled, right? We were spoiled. There's absolutely
yeah.
no two ways about it. And a lot of people think it's crazy now that I live in live in Asia. Like, why would I give
Yeah. Why'd you leave?
yeah, why
Yeah.
would I give up the blue lake for this pollution? But
Yeah.
there's always a trade off, of course. So for me, contextually, I came from a place that where the planet, where
Mm,
the earth and the environment that we lived in was pristine, right? And the New Zealand government has always been so strong and activate, sort of, promoting and taking active steps to maintain the beauty of New Zealand. So I think contextually for me, it was sort of like I'm from this place. It's always good, kind of, and we came here, and it was sort of the complete opposite. And when I
mm,
talk about opposite, I mean like recycling here is like you put it in recycling bins, and then they just put it all together. So, so it's kind of like it's kind of like on the facade, it's there, but as soon as you pull
mm,
back the curtain, it's not there. And the adoption of
yeah.
sustainability has been really slow. And because we're a carbon contributor, because even though we're not the asset owner, we don't operate the trucks and the vans and the planes and the ships, we certainly are still contributing intrinsically to that by selling our services and trying to consolidate our brand's efforts across their supply chain with their logistics. And as a result of that, we felt that we had a responsibility to take a position on that. That was both good for our own centered values, so like good for Chris and I as owners of the business because we cared about it,
Mm,
but also because we know that the brands that we want to work with also care about it. And I think that was really the tipping point. It was like we really want to just partner with brands that do care. Of course, we understand that not everyone's going to be at the top of their priority list, but certainly we find
mm,
like if it's a top three thing, then that's a really contributing factor to how we can collaborate more effectively together. And in terms of how we did it, how we got to carbon neutrality and all of that, I mean, that's a really rigorous process. So we partnered with a sustainability consultancy based out of Singapore, and effectively they help you to audit your business. It's a bit like I don't know if you're familiar with B Corp, like the B Corp certification.
yeah.
It's sort of
Sure.
like there's a fairly rigorous kind of set of auditing that is required, and they look at everything from what are you contributing across different scope levels of emissions. So there's like scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and there are in each side scope, in each one of the scopes, there are different levels of emissions. And we had to figure out kind of where do we sit in those levels. We then had to look at all of our activity, like our office, how we got to the office, our international travel, how much our warehousing across our portfolio of warehouses and suppliers, which is around 55 suppliers globally. We had to audit all of them and say, hey, we need all this information. Can you help us from power energy, water energy, hours of operation, all of these things to try and help build some assumptions so we could gather, how much of our business inside our suppliers were we having an impact on. And at the end of all
Mm,
of that took like us about a year to do that, all of that work, like about 9-10 months. And because obviously we're relying on a lot of external parties to provide us that information. So sort of took a bit longer than we would have liked. And then from there, we've published our first report in 2022. And then technically you're not carbon neutral for a whole year after that because you then have to like go through the actual
mm,
offsetting phase once you've actually done your audit. And once we did the audit, and we've just about to release our 2023 report, So we've done 2021, 2022, and now we're just about to release 2023. And 2023 will technically be our first year of being fully carbon neutral, because we offset everything from the previous year and
Nice.
the year of. So
Mm,
certainly the big piece around this whole sustainability thing is that, carbon neutrality is great and it's good and it's healthy and it
mm,
sounds good, but fundamentally it's really only the first step in what needs to be a far more. I feel like all we're doing is putting a bandage on it, really, and that's good. That's better than letting it bleed out, But certainly, from a process perspective, it's been really rigorous, and we wanted it to be really credible, and we want it to be fair, and we wanted it to be transparent as much as we could make it. Um, and that's
mm.
kind of where we've landed on it now. And we're still learning. Like, it's a big learning curve. Like, me and Chris knew nothing about this stuff before we started. Even learning how to buy carbon credits. Like, who would have thought that I'd be running a business and trying to buy carbon credits at the same time? So, it's sort of,
Mm.
the world is moving quickly. But I think the number one thing is that it's important to us personally, and then it's also, we know that the brands of tomorrow, it will matter to them. And now,
Mm.
if we take a stage, we're a really, really early mover in Asia. Like I said, adoption of sustainability is
Yeah.
effectively negligible. It's there, but it's not there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting to hear kind of the origin of why you wanted to do it. And I think that makes total sense. And I think too, I think it's a great thing because you're really kind of setting the foundation as that kind of expands. But even as like, Western brands want to expand into the Eastern markets, I mean, that's important to them, right? It's more important in the West, I guess you could say, based on what you're telling us about some of these things. And I think that goes a long way in being able to continue that through the entire supply chain. So it'd be really interesting to see how that kind of develops and how you guys, kind of start the movement over there a little
Yeah,
bit in a
I
sense,
mean,
being early adopters. Yeah.
a good example to compare it to would be like the EU regulations that are just about to drop. Like,
Yeah.
you've literally, on one side of the planet, you've got the European Union putting together like fully regulated like reporting standards that you must meet, and you'll be like fined if you don't do it, which is effectively
Yeah.
like paying tax. And then on the flip side, you've got a market that it's still like the Wild West. It's like, yeah, you can do it if you want, but no one's probably going to believe you. People might think it's greenwashing. How legitimate are you?
Yeah.
And yet all the stuff coming into the EU, a big chunk of it's coming from the east. So there's quite a lot
Yeah.
of irony about the progression, because
Mm.
obviously there are different countries running completely different paces of the race.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it'd be interesting to see how that kind of continues to evolve, and how does these countries and continents, I mean, how they kind of like align on this somewhere in the future, right? I mean, hopefully there's some alignment somewhere in
Yeah,
the future,
hopefully.
definitely. So very interesting to hear about that, and kind of the process and the journey that went into that. And now you guys are also focused on your in-house tech platform, which I believe is kind of in beta right now with some of your customers. But tell us a little bit about what does that entail? And I think also too, I'm curious, like, why, there's so many softwares, tech out there in the world, why also the choice to kind of go
Yeah.
in-house with it as well.
Yeah. It was one we debated for ages. I can tell you that, when you look at the cost of doing it yourself. But certainly, for us, Kevin, it
Yeah.
was, so we've always relied on white labeled third party software right up and from day one. We've been really transparent about that. Where it's not our technology, it's not our proprietary software. So that means a couple of things. One, it means that we don't have much control. It also means that we don't have much agility when it comes to specific requests, or needs that we might have. So that sort of those couple of things, kind of over 8 years and trying to build and scale the business to be more efficient. Those two things really keep coming back to, hey, our business model was not really fit for anything that's available in the market. And on a totality perspective, there are aspects that absolutely are, order management, warehouse management, all of those aspects are right. There are aspects that are there, but there's no one control tower. And we've called the product bundle, because the idea is that we're sort of bundling the operations of our customers together. And I think the really unique thing about our offering is that we are not a a traditional asset owner seller. So we're not just trying to sell the four
Mm,
walls of the shed or three sheds or four sheds. We're trying to really deliver on the brand's promise, and part of that is everything from post production, so the minute it's finished, right down to getting it to the consumer door. And we want to offer the brands that bundled operating tower. And we felt like the best place to do that was, rather than relying on, I think we were using three pieces of white label to deliver the operation.
mm,
And that anyone in technology will tell you that, what you should do is just build something over the top of it, or or look at how you can consolidate away from having three systems. And so big part of it was that, really, in terms of why we did it, and what it is. And what it is really is fundamentally, it's not an operations tool. So we've not built a WMS. We've not built the ground up operating systems, because we don't need that, because all of our subcontractors have got that. All of our partner network has got that.
yeah.
So what we need is, we need the power of the data coming in from multiple sources, both with our customer, because sometimes obviously we might feed into a customer's factory or their ERP system or their storefront. So we needed the ability to be able to kind of feed that information, that critical information, into us. And then we wanted to have the ability to have the system do all of the heavy lifting on the automation, in terms of, this particular piece of data needs to go to the
Mm,
subcontractor for this particular action. And that really, in my opinion, is the power of what we're building. And we're building that across 50, 60 vendors through a fully API driven platform. And that will enable both a really systematic help for us as an operation, but it will also enable a whole bunch of benefits for our customers, because now, instead of having to have, I know that there's aggregation platforms, and there's lots of, 3PL has, their sales channel, and then they have like 100 couriers, but all of that is limited to that one asset owner. Whereas now we're opening you up to
mm,
not just that one asset owner, but our 55 asset owners, and their respective networks. So it really is kind of almost creating like another layer of options for our customers to choose from, as well as obviously our own direct contracts as well, that we hold with some carriers as well. So it means that we can kind of play around a bit more effectively with the technology. And then from here, we're hoping that the technology will enable our customers to have a superior experience, because like I said, it's not an operating platform. It's more of a sort of that gathering and allocating tool, and then that will tell us a whole bunch of things. We'll be pulling
mm.
insights from all of our respective suppliers, as well as from our customers, and we'll start using the data, and hopefully over time we'll build up a decent pool of data, and from there we might be able to do more and more insights and offer more value, both for existing and new customers in the future.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's great, and I think that perspective on it, and looking at it in that way to develop it so that it makes sense for kind of this, I guess, ecosystem that you're developing with all these different partners and contractors. I mean, I think it makes sense to bring it all together and develop that in the way that makes sense for you and for the brands that want to work with you and go through you. So it's really interesting to hear how you've thought about that and how you're kind of developing that now, and be interested to hear how that continues
Yeah,
to evolve into the future as well, especially as the market continues to evolve over there as well. So super interesting talking to you here, Nick, today, and learning about kind of the Asian market over there, and CBIP Logistics as well, and kind of all those different nuances from the east compared to the west, and all those different things. So if people are interested in learning more about CBIP Logistics, what's the best way to do that?
so you can just find us at cbiplogistics.com, nice and easy. Or alternatively, you can find me on LinkedIn, just at Nick Bartlett. Probably search Hong Kong, maybe. There might be a few Nick Bartletts out and about. Or alternatively, you can find me on Twitter as well, Nick_Bartlett CBIP as well. Drop a like or a follow, or whatever you'd like to do. But yeah, certainly we're always up for a chat, and really appreciate the chance to be on the show, Kevin. And great work that you're doing, sharing, getting all these guests on, and having so much good knowledge shared with your audience as well. It's just really, really good to see just the quality of episodes and stuff that have come out as well.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. And we'll definitely share all the information about CBIP Logistics and Nick as well at thenewwarehouse.com so people can easily find it. So, Nick, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.
Hey, Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, the New Warehouse Podcast. And I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel. And if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesaresexy.com and get your own.